Hello there, hope you're all doing well. Today we're going to talk about Module 45, which is all about the social development of infants and children. And I have to say, this module, along with the last one about cognitive development and Piaget, Vygotsky, those two modules, the last one and this one, I would say are probably the most important ones to take away from this whole unit. This one we're covering today, it does have a lot of really good stuff in it. Many people that you need to know, lots of experiments. So let's go ahead and get right into that. As Ms. Jessel said in the last video, I'm not going to go through every single slide. We are trying to kind of condense things as much as we can in preparation for the AP exam. So you should go back and look at some of these things on your own, but I'm kind of just going to pick out the most important parts to share with you right now. So see, like I said, lots of different stuff that we are going to go through here. So the very first thing to talk about in terms of their social development is the attachment that children have with their caregivers. So infants come to prefer familiar faces and voices. They coo and gurgle when given a parent's attention. So children are literally wired from birth to recognize other people better. So sight is one of the most complicated traits or senses to develop in a child. And the first thing that children are able to start recognizing is faces when they are able to start seeing things. So that tells you how important faces are. Also, when a baby is first born, a baby can only see about like 6 inches away, like from their face. And that is because that is pretty much the distance of, if a mother is breastfeeding, that is the distance between a mother's face and their child's face. So that child can get to learn their mother's face better. So clearly, faces and humans are very important with children forming relationships. We are wired to want to associate with people. So attachment, I'm sure you can kind of figure out the definition here, but basically it's seeking closeness with your caregiver and showing distress if you are separated. And that is specific to your childhood, but then your attachment can then continue on through your adolescence and adulthood as well. So we are going to talk through some really important things with attachment in just a moment. On the other side of that kind of is when you have stranger anxiety, and that is totally normal. It's not something to be concerned about beginning around age 8 months. That is when children will start to display a little bit of stranger anxiety. If it continues well into childhood, adolescence, that's when it's maybe something to address. But otherwise, it's common because children get so attached to their parents, their guardians, whoever's taking care of them, that anyone else is a little bit scary to them. So that peaks then about 13 months, but then gradually declines after that. Okay, so here is one of your first really important studies and people for this module here. So Harry Harlow, he is a big person that you need to know. He did this experiment with monkeys, and I will tell you it's a sad experiment to see, but it was really important in us understanding attachment in infants, children, animals, and humans. So in class, we will watch a video about this experiment here so you can see it a little more. But basically what happened is, I'm going to go to this slide here. So basically they created 2 different types of mothers for the monkeys. And one of them was called a wire mother because it was just this thing made out of wire. And the other thing was called a cloth mother. It was kind of the same thing, but then covered in cloth. So it was like softer to the touch and everything. And then these monkeys were kind of raised by these cloth and wire monkeys. And they had initially thought that the monkey would prefer whichever one of the 2 mothers gives it food, whichever one has a bottle attached to it, because that's where their nourishment comes from. That's how they will sustain living, whichever one provides the food source. However, that's not what they found. They found that the monkeys who were raised by the wire mother, and as you can see here, the one that has, when the wire mother has the bottle attached to it, the monkey will get its food from that mother, which is important. However, it greatly prefers the cloth mother, as you can see over here. So basically, like, look at how much this monkey is still clinging on to the cloth mother as much as they can, and like just barely moving over to the wire one to get the food that it needs. But otherwise, it really, really wants to cling on to that cloth mother. And so this taught us something really important, and that is these terms right here. So that is contact comfort. So whenever you hear Harry Harlow, you should immediately associate that with contact comfort. And so that's basically what they found in the study, is that it's not that we are most attached to whoever provides us what we need to survive, but also how important comfort is, and like tactile touch and everything. That is so important to development as well. So children who then do not have as much of that contact comfort can start to develop more of those anxious feelings and behaviors. So as I said, we can watch a video about that in class. Remember the term critical period. So as you're developing, there's a specific window of time that's really important for you to develop certain things, certain traits, or otherwise it becomes like kind of too hard after that point to develop those things. So a lot of times there is a critical period with animals that we have seen, but there's not quite as much of a well-defined critical period with with humans. So I'll come back to that in 1 second. But with animals, we see they have this super important critical period in just the hours shortly after hatching. So that's for like ducklings, goslings, chicks. So whatever object they see first when they are first born during that critical period is what they will then associate as their mother. And that is the thing that they're going to attach to. And that is this term called imprinting. So here's our next big thing for this module. Konrad Lorenz, he's the name that you need to know. And the word that goes with him is imprinting. So he discovered exactly that within those first couple hours of life, whatever the animal sees first is what it's going to assume as its mother and follow it around and everything. So you can see here, obviously, usually the duck will see its own mother first. So that's good. It then learns to follow around its mother. However, in his experiments, he made sure that he was the first thing that some of these little ducklings saw. And now you can see how they imprinted on him and are following him around everywhere. All right, so that is kind of the critical period and kind of attachment and imprinting with animals specifically. Humans, though, don't really imprint because we don't really have as much of that critical period right at the beginning of life. We do still have some kind of critical period, some kind of sensitive period, but it's not as clearly defined as it is in animals. But definitely sometime within those first couple of like weeks, months, even like years into development is very important. All right, now we're on to our next big thing for this module. So like I said, everything in here is pretty much just like really important. So the main person who studied attachment and like attachment styles in children is Mary Ainsworth, and she developed this experiment called the strange situation. So again, Ainsworth associate strange situation with her. So here's what happened here. I'm actually going to go ahead to this image here, which you kind of have to look closely at, but it explains what happens. So in the first stage in her experiment, the strange situation, a mother, and they did end up doing variations when then it would be the father, but for the original experiment, the mother and the child were in the same room, and the child is just like an infant, maybe a young toddler, and they're in this new environment, this like strange environment to them, and there's toys around and everything. So while the child's mother's there, they start to observe, is the child playing with the toys? What are they doing together? Then a stranger enters the room. So it's the child, the mother, and a stranger. Then the mom leaves the room and it's just the stranger and the child. And they kind of keep doing that a little bit. The mom comes back and then again, she leaves. So basically the main important thing to know here is that eventually the child is left alone just with the stranger. And the stranger is someone part of the research study. They're not like someone off the street. So it was a safe thing. And so they could kind of see what happened when the child was with that stranger. But then the most important piece was when the mother did finally return. And that is called the reunion. So the reunion between the mother and the child is the big part that tells us what kind of attachment style that child has with their mother. So that's what we're going to look at on the next slide, is the kind of 4 different types of attachment styles that we have. But just to reemphasize here that the reunion, when the mother returned back to the room, that's really what's telling of how did the child feel after being left by their mother and then being with a stranger and then their mother returning. Are they happy she's back? Are they like mad at her that she left? That's what we're about to find out with attachment styles. So there's kind of 2 main categories here, either secure attachment or insecure attachment. Secure attachment is with infants who comfortably explore the environment when their caregiver is there. So when it's just the child and their mom in the room, the child is able to go away from her and play with some new toys that are over there. They only show temporary distress when the caregiver leaves. So they're kind of upset, but they move on, they get over it. And then when the mother returns, they're comforted by that. They are happy that she returns. They go and they are happy to see their mother, but then they're also able to go off again and play on their own. The other side of that is insecure attachment, which is demonstrated by infants who display a clinging or anxious, avoidant, any of those kinds of behaviors. Basically, they're resisting closeness. So insecure attachment now kind of breaks down into 2 different categories, and those are these 2, anxious and avoidant. So we're going to take a look at those here on the next slide. So main 2, secure and insecure. But under insecure, we've got anxious. It's also known as ambivalent. So if you ever see that word instead, ambivalent, that's the same thing as the anxious attachment. So one type of insecure attachment is anxious ambivalent. The other is called avoidant. So the anxious ambivalent attachment is that the child is constantly craving acceptance. They want to make sure that their caregiver is paying attention to them and that they are the center of attention, but they are also always looking for signs of possible rejection. So every little thing they're looking at, is my caregiver like talking to someone else? Are they not paying as much attention to me? Are they going to abandon me? Those kinds of things. With avoidant attachment, those children demonstrate discomfort getting close to others. So instead, they try to avoid, just like it sounds like, they try to avoid and keep their distance from other people. So they don't get too attached to their caregiver or anyone else, really. So those are kind of some other styles we see here. And you can see in this image here kind of what happens. So secure attachment, the child is happy. They go back to their parent and greet them with positive emotions. If they're ambivalent or anxious, then they're kind of scared of the strangers. They're not happy about that situation. Avoidant, they might avoid the parents. So when their caregiver leaves and then comes back, the child wants nothing to do with them. They're like, you left me. I don't need to associate with you. So I'm not going to come over to you. There is one other kind too that is mentioned sometimes, and that is disordered attachment. And that's kind of just this catch-all category for the child has some kind of confusion. There's apprehension, like they don't necessarily respond in one specific way. They might be kind of torn of like, do I go to my caregiver or do I go somewhere else? So it's just, that's why it's disordered. So that is one other one to know about, but definitely the most important is secure attachment, and then knowing those 2 kinds of insecure attachment. And we have seen that those attachment styles do affect you throughout the rest of your life. You develop similar attachment styles then with peers and when you become involved in a romantic relationship. So into your adulthood, your attachment style as a child tends to be kind of the same thing. And I do want to mention one more thing real quick, that the parenting style, or sorry, the attachment style that has seen to provide the best outcome in children is secure attachment. So that is the one, I guess, that we're like striving for the most based on research, that those children tend to have traits and outcomes in life that are better than the other groups. So another thing to think about is temperament. And this is a person's innate and inborn characteristic, emotional reactivity, and intensity. So basically, it's kind of like, what's the mood of the baby, like when they're first born? And this is also something, temperament is something that, again, can kind of carry on through your adulthood and the rest of your life. So temperament and attachment are definitely potentially influenced, because think about this, if a baby's temperament is that they're very difficult, meaning they're crying all the time, they're irritable, there's nothing you can do to calm them down, they're unpredictable, then that might mean that the parent is a little more hesitant to try to take care of the child. They might still respond, but it's frustrating because they don't know what to do to help the child and everything. So that can then shape the attachment style that the child would have with their parent. And on the other hand, of children who have an easy temperament, so they're cheerful, relaxed, they're feeding, good sleeping schedules and everything, it might be much easier to form a more secure attachment there because it's easier for the parent to respond to the child's needs. So it is interesting that it's not just solely on the parent. It's not like, what kind of parent are you? It depends too on the temperament of the child. That will affect the parenting that comes from the child then. So that's kind of here what all this is saying. So you can look into that research a little more yourself. I'm not going to really go into this part here too much, but basically there are several slides here that are showing the importance of kind of societally our impact of having fathers being very involved in children's lives now. Traditionally, it's usually been that the mothers in the caretaking role. However, we have seen that greatly shift over past decades and everything. That maybe more mothers are working and more fathers are either stay at home or they just do more to partake in the caretaking experience. So you can kind of look through these slides to see that of ways that fathers can be very important and just as beneficial to the child. So I did want to show this one thing here. There we go. So the parents' genders do not affect the children's well-being. So basically, it doesn't really matter if it's the mother who is caring more for the child or the father. And if it's like you are a female raised by your mother versus a male raised by your father, there doesn't appear to be any real difference on the child's well-being. So these are some things to just take a look at with having co-parenting both a mother and a father. And it doesn't have to be biological. It can be a mother or father figure. So some other guardian you have, like an aunt, an uncle. It could be adopted parents, any of those kinds of things. All right, so moving back to that secure attachment, that's kind of the like prime attachment style that we have. And that helps children to develop a basic trust, meaning that they kind of get this sense that the world is predictable and reliable, like just like they have a good sense about the world. They're not super wary about things and pessimistic. They know that there's people that they can trust. So Erik Erikson is the person who kind of is really associated with basic trust. I will tell you that 2 modules for now, or 3, we're going to be talking more about Erik Erikson, who is incredibly important in some other developmental aspects of children, but he is briefly mentioned here. So we will come back to Erikson with his more important stuff, but just kind of know he goes with basic trust here. All right, so next, oops, sorry, okay, there we go. We got a question here. So just that brief thing by Erik Erikson and his wife, Jona Eareckson. They found that children who are securely attached are also likely to be, which of these things? And that would be letter B, developing a sense of basic trust. So securely attached, you develop your basic trust. Again, something I'm not going to talk much about here is neglect and abuse in childhood and how that affects attachment, because we have talked about this a couple different times, talking about the nurture side of nature, nurture, and development and everything. So you can look again at this study as something we've mentioned already before, but that basically there is an impact of abuse and neglect on children, but then also having some kind of nurturing environment after that can start to kind of reverse some of the effects that happen there. So again, yes, you can look through some of these on your own. However, it is important to note though that most children who grow up under adversity, meaning there's some kind of hardship that you have growing up, so it could be some kind of trauma that you've experienced. It could even be things of maybe not having a large income in your family, so you might have to work at an early age. Any of those kinds of things, things that are adversity, you can tend to become very resilient with them. So that means that you learn to adjust to them and you are able to overcome them and not let them hold you back. So if you are someone who experiences adversity and everything, it's not saying that you will never be able to have a successful or wonderful life. It means that you then will most likely show resilience, meaning like you can bounce back from tough situations. You know how to deal with them and kind of keep growing and everything. All right, the next important concept here is self-concept. And basically that is an understanding and assessment of who children are. They can tell like, oh, this is me. Like I have this concept of myself here. So one thing that they did to kind of test this was when do we recognize ourselves in the mirror? When do you realize, oh, that image right there is actually me? So one thing that they did to study that is they would dab a color on the child's nose, like a little dab of red or something like that. Then they would have the child look into the mirror, and the children who were about 6 months old would then touch that red dot in the mirror as if it was a different child. They're like, oh, what's that? But then by about 15 to 18 months, they start to touch their own noses when they see the colored spot in the mirror, because they realize when they look in the mirror, like, wait, what's that? And they realize that's them. So they touch their own nose. So that's saying they start to develop a sense of self-concept. And then that helps you to become more confident, independent, optimistic, assertive, and sociable. So lots of good things when you have self-concept. Couple other things I'm going to skip there so you can look back at them. All right, our question here, an 18-month-old typically recognizes herself in a mirror. This self-awareness contributes to the thing that we just finished talking about. That is letter B, self-concept. Well done. All right, so we're finally on to the last big chunk of this module here, and this is parenting styles. So don't get this confused with attachment styles. Attachment styles are about the child. What kind of relationship does the child have with their parent? Parenting styles are more what is the style that the parent has in responding and interacting with their children. So attachment is more based on the child. Parenting styles are based on the parent. And there's 4 different kinds of parenting styles. We've got authoritarian parents, and they are ones who impose rules and demand obedience. So it's kind of like when you ask, why do I have to do this? And they say, because I said so. And it's just, you have to go do this. You have to curfew at this time, come home, do these dishes. It's not much of a conversation between parent and child. It's whatever the parent says is what goes. That's authoritarian. Similarly sounding, but different from that, is authoritative parents. Authoritative parents, they set rules, but they allow open discussion and exceptions. So it's not that like you need to go do this thing right now and you better obey that. Instead, the child could then talk about it and be like, but that doesn't really make sense because like I just did this other chore, could we talk about this? And they have more of a conversation there. Or if you do something wrong, rather than the parent just yelling at you and you getting in trouble, they might discuss it with you and be like, okay, so what's the lesson we can take away from this? Why is this something you shouldn't do again in the future? So there are rules with authoritative, but it's also an open conversation between parent and child. Then we have permissive parents who basically don't set many limits. They make very few demands and use little punishment. So it's kind of like they're there to help out and to raise you and all those things. They don't not pay attention to you. They're not neglectful or anything, but it's kind of, maybe they don't always know exactly where you are. You don't have curfew, those kinds of things. It's more like relaxed style. Finally, we have negligent parents. They are parents who are careless, inattentive, and do not seek a close relationship with their children. So negligent parents are not really taking care of their child the way they need to with just even meeting their basic demands in life. So negligent parents means you're not really paying attention to your child the way that you need to. It is important to remember authoritarian and authoritative sound super similar, but they're different. So one idea that the textbook here is giving you to remember the difference between the two is that authoritative ends in the letters I, B, E, and so does the word give. And so authoritative is more like give and take between the parent and the child. It's not just this is the way things are. It's a conversation between the two. So authoritative, give and take between parent and child. I then also like to remember that authoritarian, you might remember that from a type of government. Authoritarian goes with like totalitarian and dictatorship, those kinds of things. And it's that one person has sole power there. They're the only person with the power. That's kind of the same idea with authoritarian in terms of between parent and child. So two little tricks you can use to remember the difference between the two, because they do sound very similar but are pretty different. Definitely feel free to come up with other mnemonic devices for yourself too. So then what kinds of outcomes are associated with these parenting styles? For authoritarian parents, meaning what I say goes, children with less social skill and self-esteem and a brain that overreacts when they make mistakes. Those are our children who come from authoritarian parents. Children who come from permissive parents tend to be more aggressive and immature because there's not really a lot of rules or boundaries set. They might not have as much self-control because maybe just you're used to asking for something and you get it, that kind of thing. Negligent parents lead to children with poor academic and social outcomes, which makes sense. They're not getting the socialization from their parents the way that they need to. And then finally, authoritative parents, the one that's the give and take between the parent and child, that results in children with the highest self-esteem, self-reliance, self-regulation, and social competence. So basically, these children know how to be independent. They know what to do on their own and how to react and everything. And they also interact well with others too. So I'm going to come to that in 1 second. So just as I said with the attachment style, the kind of like main one you want to strive for is the secure attachment. With parenting styles, authoritative parenting is what we should try to strive towards. That is what research has shown tends to have the best outcomes for children. And please keep in mind with all the stuff in this module that if you do not necessarily fall into that like optimal category, it does not mean that you can't be successful and still have an awesome life and everything. You can absolutely still overcome different struggles and all those different things and have a wonderful life. So don't take this too personally about yourself or anything. It's just what research has shown us. So just kind of make sure you keep some distance as you're thinking about these things. Do remember though that correlation is not causation. So there are some other things that maybe result in these good outcomes in certain children. So maybe like differences in parental warmth from child to child, which depends on their temperament, remember. Also, maybe it's something like competent parents and their competent children share genes that predispose them to social competence. We don't know. There could be some other factors involved here. So keep in mind that correlation is not causation. All right, so you can take a look at that one on your own to identify different parenting styles, and we're going to do something with that in class as well. But that is it for this module. Like I said, there was a lot involved in it. Sorry, this is decently long, but I want to recap the most important things. So we had Harry Harlow, which is the contact comfort. That was the monkey study. We've got Konrad Lorenz, who taught us about imprinting of when animals learn to get attached to whatever's the thing that they see first. Mary Ainsworth, she has the strange situation, and that's the thing with the parent and the child. The mother leaves, comes back, then what does that look like with the child? So she is associated with with attachment styles and the strange situation. That's Mary Ainsworth. Then we briefly had Erik Erikson in relation to self-concept, but that's not really like the biggest thing to associate with him. So remember, we'll come back to him in a bit. And then finally, we talked about the different parenting styles. So lots of stuff in this module. Definitely feel free to go back and look over it some more if you need to. But be prepared to come to class with any questions to get clarification. Awesome job. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.